I would now like to invite the aunties to come up, who are going to invite the Honourable Kevin Barker to come and speak. The aunties, please come forward.
So Kevin, on behalf of our dear sisters here, we would like to ask you to come forward and to say what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that extremely warm and generous welcome. And I begin by acknowledging the first Australians on whose land we meet and whose cultures we celebrate as the oldest continuing cultures in human history. Uncle Des, members of the Stolen Generation, what extraordinary resilience, what an extraordinary determination to live, to survive, to prosper, to triumph. You inspire us. To Cheryl and to my good friend Sam, who I've known since the Mesolithic period. Thank you for the work which is done by Link Up. It is terrific work you've done all these years, and heartbreaking work, but rewarding work in helping to heal the broken-hearted. And thank you, Les, for that beautiful song. Where have you gone?
Behind you.
I hope you noticed from the program, by the way, that Les hasn't changed a bit since his photograph. It reminds me of some of my campaign photographs. Mysteriously, I haven't changed in 15 years either. And friends, one and all, thank you for being here. I see also the State Member for Bulimba. I acknowledge your presence. The State Member for South Brisbane, I think, Jackie, you hiding behind the pillar over there. I know you. And Helen Abrahams from the Brisbane City Council, local councillor, wonderful friends of mine, great supporters of Indigenous people. Have I not acknowledged any other local political representatives who are here? Okay, thank you. I've had an extraordinary week, and not in the way in which most people think. It's been an extraordinary week because I have encountered afresh the strength of Indigenous Australia. On last Friday in Sydney at Government House with Governor Murray Bashir, who's an extraordinary friend of Indigenous Australia. We sat down and we gathered, as we've done the last several years, for breakfast, to reflect on the apology and to hear from the Stolen Generations. And to meet young kids who are coming through all of that with flying colours, off to conquer the world, Aboriginal kids from across the country. And then, just a couple of days ago in Adelaide, at Reconciliation South Australia, a breakfast of 600 to 700 to celebrate and to commemorate the apology, including hundreds of people from the Stolen Generations. And to stand as I did for some time after I spoke, and to listen and to hear the stories. These are extraordinary stories of human resilience and forgiveness. People often ask me, or say to me, what a wonderful thing it was that a white fella like me stood up and apologised. It's not quite how I see it, really. What I find remarkable is that the apology I offered was accepted by my Aboriginal brothers and sisters. That's the miracle of the apology. And then yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I can't remember really, it's Canberra, it's a different world. In the recent past, Wednesday night, there was this extraordinary concert on the lawns in front of Parliament House in Canberra, where I sort of crept up the back and sat down with a few folks to watch. And there were thousands of Indigenous people there, and others celebrating, commemorating and celebrating. And I have found all of that and all of these experiences and gathering with you here this afternoon so extraordinarily strengthening. For me, Cairo, white fella from Central Casting, him, or as they said in the song, he. So I thank you for that. You've really done a lot for me this week as well. Some have asked around the world, well, what was the apology all about? Is it just a set of words? As some of you may have heard me say once or twice before, when the apology was delivered on the 13th of February, I think I began writing it on about the 9th or 10th. I knew it had been coming for some months. Therese always says I procrastinate. My staff know that I procrastinate. But it's a bit like this. I grew up in a community in rural Queensland around Yamundi and then Nambour, just up the road here, where I did not know really any or many Indigenous people. It's just the truth of it. Jackie Huggins and I had an extraordinary conversation recently in a suburb of Nambour, Co in Switzerland, and we were both attending a conference and speaking to the world about reconciliation. And we were sitting down having a cup of tea saying, what are we going to say to all these people, you know, about reconciliation in Australia, from Germany, they're from Britain, from America, goodness knows where. And we got talking about the apology, and I said, you know, the hard thing for me was I had read so much, I had reflected so much, but I experienced so little. And then I told her the story, which reminds me so much of that terrible few lines that you gave to us before, which I wrote down carefully. When you're white, everything's all right, and when you're black, you should stand back. That's shocking. Shockingly true and shocking. So a bit like this, so Jackie and I were having this yak, this great sort of 19th century palace, wherever we were, overlooking Lake Geneva. And what were we going to say? And I explained all this to her, and she said, surely this town of Yamundi, and you must have known some Indigenous people. I said, no, there was an Islander family. Are you happy with me telling this story? Okay. I should check. White fellas are notoriously insensitive as well. Yeah, it's true. It's not a bad strategy either. So I said there was an Islander family there, the Pickerings, and she said, an Islander family? I said, yeah, an Islander family. And there was Mrs. Pickering, her husband the Major, the boys that we went to school with at Yamundi Primary School, one of whom's name was Greg, who was about my age, and an older brother, whose name was Rod, and there were others as well. And so Jackie leans over to me and says, they weren't Islander people, they're Aboriginal people. I said, no, they're Islander people. Because they always said they were Islander people. That was the story. Because Mrs. Pick, who's long gone on to, as we called her, to receive her eternal reward, extraordinary woman, and much loved in the community, always insisted that they were from the South Sea Islands. They weren't Aboriginal. And I thought to myself, as a kid growing up, my mum, who's a Roman Catholic from Central Casting, anyone know what I mean by that? You know, sort of traditional Queensland country, rural Catholic. Got the picture? Yeah. Right. And Mum has a great sort of sense of social justice about her. This was in the 60s. Every month would insist on having the Pickering boys out to play on our farm, and every other month we'd go into the Major's place just by the Imundi railway station, you know the place, you've been there, Jackie, to play with them. So these were Islander kids. I didn't know I was playing with Aboriginal kids. I thought these were kids from Fiji or somewhere, you know. And that was my completely unconscious exposure to these kids who were good playmates and good friends. And there have been some tragic ends, as I found out. And Mrs. Pick, who was so dearly loved in the community, but not able to admit that she was an Aboriginal Australian woman. And I thought to myself, how could that be? And to go back to your phrase before, shocking but shockingly true. It reminds me also of the morning of the apology. I remember standing there with Therese as we greeted everyone as they came through the ceremonial entrance in Parliament House. And this elderly lady from the Stolen Generations gave her a big cuddle and a big kiss and come into our place, go this way, a cup of tea over there. And she said to Therese later on that she would have been in her 70s. I was the first white fella ever to kiss her. Oh, I just find that shocking. A lot of these things are shocking, but they actually need to be said because they're part of the shared and lived experience of my brothers and sisters who are here today. So when people say, well, what's the apology? It's a set of words. Well, at one level it is, but I have thought long and hard about it before writing it. And when I sat down with Nana Fijo, who came from near Tennant Creek and was ripped away from her family at the age of 5 by black trackers working on behalf of the Protector of Natives, then lost contact. It was when I just began to grasp in my heart the extraordinary humiliation, degradation, and plain bastardry by white Australians, that it is only at that point that you can grasp in the pit of your stomach the need to say sorry. And others, particularly blokes I've got to say, because we're notoriously bad at navigating our emotions. The aunties are much better, by the way, just generally speaking. Black, white, brindle, everyone. You know, aunties are just generally better in my experience. It was really important to respond to blokes saying, yeah, but that's just all words, what's the substance of it? But I've said to many fellows around the country, from white Australia, Indigenous Australia, if you and your personal relationships and your family relationships have wronged somebody, you can't just walk in the door 3 or 4 years later and say, okay, now let's just get on and go shopping together. It just doesn't work because there's been a wounding. It's deep, it's profound, it's spiritual, it's in the soul, it's in the heart, it's in the emotions, it's in the psychology, it's in the whole person. And so to say sorry was, in my conclusion, absolutely fundamental to rebuild a bridge of spiritual connection between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And so, in putting out the hand of saying I'm sorry, the leap of faith was this: what would be said back? And I was blown away when my hand was accepted. That is the miracle of the apology. I think something else happened too with the apology, which is that white Australia that looked at this and they felt some of this transforming spirit as well. And then the amazing thing, which people like Jackie and myself have experienced around the world, is And lo and behold, I don't think white Australians were really conscious of this, the world was watching. It's a funny old thing about being Australians. You know how we always see ourselves as the country of freedom, the fair go, out there, creative, enterprising, splashing on the, you know, on the back foot, 4 to the boundary, 6 points through the middle, you know, all that sort of stuff. That's us, okay? Freedom, fair go, you know, out there, doing things. And the rest of the world has seen that for hundreds of years, from Gallipoli on. But the rest of the world has always been scratching the back of their head about what is it about this land of the fair go that could treat Indigenous Australians as second-class and third-class citizens. And worse, as some have said. And that was the reservation in people's minds. And I used to be in the diplomatic service. You run around the world, and every now and then, in the politest of company, after you'd had a few, and not that I've had a few, but they would touch on this very sensitive subject. You'd think, but we're not like that. But yes, we were. And so around the world, they finally looked at this bunch of people for whom they had some respect, that is Australians, and realised that finally white Australia had begun, I use the word advisedly, to turn a corner. And I remember just after that, I was, I think, off to London and Brussels and met the President of the European Commission. His first lines to me, what an extraordinary speech. I said, when I'd just given one on foreign policy somewhere, I said, oh, I didn't think it was that bright. No, the apology, you dill. And he said their entire Commission Secretariat in Brussels, the people who run the European Union, each of the commissioners, the President of the Commission, sat and watched it live on CNN, and as it was right around the world. I didn't know anything about that. I was just trying to get the words right and not tear up in the middle of it, which I would have thought would be monstrously self-indulgent on my part, given that the tears probably belonged elsewhere. So when people ask what was the essential business of this apology, it was doing this deep emotional work. Part 2, of course, is closing the gap. As I said at the time, words without deeds are a dead letter, a clanging cymbal, a sounding gong. And what I'm proud about, that I think is just of itself important, is the fact that we now have fixed targets, fixed timelines, and robust data to test whether we are closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. In early childhood education, in literacy and numeracy, in Year 12 retention, in employment, in Indigenous child mortality, in longevity. These things have to be done. The good news 5 years on is that in 5 or 6 of those measures, we've actually made measurable progress. In one of them, literacy and numeracy, we're not. But I am so grateful that we are now got to the stage where as a country, we can stand up each year, as I required each of my successors to do for time immemorial into the future, to report on Apology Day to the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia where we have succeeded and where we have failed, proven by the data. That's a step forward. There's more work to be done. There's constitutional recognition, and this is the third and remaining great area of the much troubled project that we have long called reconciliation. But we've embarked on this journey, and we've made some steps in the right direction. The thought I'd leave you with in this great gathering today of all my Aboriginal brothers and sisters here in the community which I represent, physically in the Australian Parliament, in Brisbane Southside, is again to say to each and every one of you, thank you. Because in my experience of the last week or so, I have felt so strengthened by the strength and the generosity of spirit that I've encountered in you good folk right across the country. I've also said this, Had I been an Indigenous Australian, had I been an Aboriginal kid, like Rick Pickering or Rodney Pickering, deceased, and then some grey-haired white fella finally stands up and delivers a nice sounding speech, I'm not sure I would have said, I accept your apology. I may have said you can take 2 to the valley. It's an ancient Queensland expression. From the dream time, it's part of ancient times. I think everyone here knows what I mean. So, I'm not sure I would have been that generous if I'd been through all that. And I have been so strengthened by your solidarity, your friendship, even being called Uncle Kev, that you put a genuine spring in my step this last week in what is a fairly arduous life called the national politics of the Commonwealth of Australia. Lastly, someone has said, so what of the future? What I'd say to each and every one of you is this: whatever the future holds for me, please know this: so long as I draw breath, I intend to be in the trenches with you. Thank you.